Today, we're diving into a story you probably think you know, The Haunting in Connecticut. It's one of the most famous paranormal cases in American history for sure. But it's also this incredibly messy, contested story about demons, desperation, and maybe, just maybe, a whole lot of deception. What you've seen in the movies, that's not even half of it.
That right there, that chilling quote comes from Philip Snedeker, the 14-year-old boy who was right at the heart of this entire nightmare. To really get what he was talking about, though, we've got to go back to the very beginning.
So, how in the world did the Snedeker family even end up in a house that would become so infamous? Well, it all kicked off with a very real, very human tragedy.
Okay, picture this. It's 1986, and the Snedeker family's world just gets shattered. Their son, Philip, is diagnosed with cancer. This meant they had to make these grueling 96-mile drives every single day for his treatment. They were physically exhausted, they were financially drained, they were desperate. So when they stumbled upon this big, cheap house for rent right near the hospital, it felt like a total godsend. They snatched it up, no questions asked. It wasn't until after they moved in that they figured out why it was so affordable. When they went down to the basement, it wasn't just a basement, it was a full-blown mortuary. I'm talking embalming tools still lying around, a body lift with chains hanging from the ceiling, and these stained concrete pits in the floor. Their new home was a former funeral home.
And almost immediately, the house's dark history started to, well, make itself known. This is where the story you think you know really begins.
Everything seemed to zero in on Philip right from the start. He was the first to experience it, this deep male voice calling his name from that creepy basement, telling him it had something to show him. He was terrified, but his parents, they just chalked it up to stress from his illness. But pretty soon, they couldn't ignore it anymore. The entire family started seeing things. A woman just standing in their young daughter's room, 3 men in suits huddled around a toy robot, and the most terrifying of all, a tall, skinny man with this pale face and black, sunken eyes just peering at them from a doorway. And then it turned violent. The family said they were being touched, groped by hands they couldn't see. Both the mom, Carmen, and her niece claimed they were actually sexually assaulted by this invisible force. Their beds would shake so violently, they said it felt like the house itself was alive and breathing. Completely terrified and out of options, the Snedekers made a phone call to the only people they thought could possibly help. And that one call, it launched their private nightmare right into the public spotlight. They called Ed and Lorraine Warren. Now, if you've seen The Conjuring or heard about Amityville, you know what these names. At the time, they were the biggest paranormal investigators on the planet. Ed was the demonologist, the expert on evil, and Lorraine was a clairvoyant, claiming she could psychically see and sense spirits. And the Warrens' diagnosis? It was so much worse than just a ghost story. Lorraine goes into the basement and claims to sense this horrific past, that the morticians there had committed necrophilia. This unspeakable act, they said, acted like a magnet for a powerful, inhuman, demonic entity. And its goal? To terrorize the family until they were weak enough to be possessed. The whole thing supposedly comes to a head with this epic, hours-long Catholic exorcism of the house. According to everyone there, the place went nuts. Walls shaking, foul smells, things flying around, before the sudden, total calm fell over the house. The evil, they said, was gone. And that should be the end of it, right? A terrifying but ultimately triumphant story. Except it wasn't. The second this story went public, it started to completely fall apart at the seams. So what really went down in that house on Meriden Avenue? Because the story pushed by the family and the Warrens, well, it's just one version of events, and it might not be the truth at all. This is where the narrative just splits wide open. On one side, you have the official story, a good family tormented by a demon. But on the other, you have Ray Garton, the author they hired to write their book, who basically said, none of it added up. Garton dropped an absolute bombshell. He claimed that when he went to Ed Warren and said, hey, these stories are all over the place, Warren's response was chilling. He supposedly said, they're crazy. Just use what you can and make the rest up. Make it scary. That's why we hired you. I mean, that one quote alone could bring the whole thing crashing down. But Garton didn't stop there. He also alleged the family had serious problems with alcohol and drugs. He claimed Carmen, the mom, was running an illegal lottery scam. And maybe the biggest nail in the coffin? He said Philip himself told him that all the visions and voices stopped the moment he started taking medication for schizophrenia. The story got torn apart even more on national television. On the Sally Jesse Raphael show, the Snedekers' own neighbors came on and just flat out contradicted them. The guy who moved in right after them said he never experienced a single strange thing. Other neighbors said no priest ever set foot in that house, and they claimed the ghost stories only started after the Snedekers fell behind on rent and were facing eviction.
Okay, so with the official story looking so shaky, you have to ask, if it wasn't a demonic haunting, what on earth was it? And that leaves us with a few, very different, but all kind of compelling possibilities. So here's where we land. Was it a real demonic haunting, just like they said? Was it an elaborate hoax to get money and maybe a book deal? Could it have been a shared psychological event, a manifestation of the unbelievable trauma that family was going through? Or was it a case of paranormal profiteers finding a vulnerable family and exploiting their pain for fame? And to make it all even more complicated, years later, even Carmen Snedeker seemed to change her tune. She publicly claimed the Warrens totally took advantage of them, coached them on what to say, and basically hijacked their story for their own benefit. But at the center of all this chaos and controversy, there's a really tragic story. Philip Snedeker, the boy who heard those voices and saw those demons, he died at just 38 years old when his cancer came back. So, in the end, we're left with a case where literally every single person involved tells a different story. The family, the world-famous investigators, the author they hired, the people who lived right next door, none of their stories line up. Who do you even begin to believe? Which leaves us with the final, haunting question that still hangs over this case today. Was the evil in that house on Meriden Avenue some kind of external, demonic force, or was it just a reflection of the very real, very human darkness and trauma that was already living inside that house with them? That is for you to decide.